Moscow, 1983. The city was frozen in anticipation. There was tension in the air, invisible, but sharp as a razor. The country froze under the gaze of a man whose name was spoken only in whispers. Even the members of the Politburo grew numb when they met his cold eyes behind their glasses. Yuri Vladimirovich Andropov, General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU, former chairman of the almighty KGB, the Flint man. That's what they called him behind his back. A face as if carved from gray granite. A gaze that pierced through any lie, any fear, any weakness. For 15 years he stood at the head of the most powerful special service in the world. For 15 years he built an empire of fear and control. Under him, the KGB reached unprecedented power. His people were in every factory, in every institute, in every editorial office. Without the committee's sanction, not a single director, not a single editor, not a single professor could be appointed. In his safes lay folders with compromising material on every minister, every marshal, every party boss. He knew all the secrets of power. He was the embodiment of total control, iron discipline, and ruthless efficiency. Dissidents disappeared without a trace or went mad in psychiatric hospitals. Corrupt officials flew from their posts like leaves in the wind. Even Brezhnev's own son-in-law, the all-powerful Cherbanov, trembled before this man. It seemed there was nothing human in him, no emotions, no weaknesses, no attachments. But that was a lie. There was one weakness, just one. And her name was Irina. Irina Yuryevna Andropova, his daughter. 30 years old, bright, lively, emotional. Unlike her father, the block of ice, she was warm and open. She worked at the magazine Musical Life, adored theater and poetry, and was friends with artists and actors. She was his secret pain and his secret pride. The only person on earth next to whom the Iron General Secretary turned into an ordinary father. The only thread connecting the master of Lubyanka to the world of normal human feelings. When Irina came to his office, the granite face softened, the cold eyes became warm. He would ask her about her work, her friends, her plans, and listen to stories about plays and exhibitions, about that world that was alien to him, but dear, because it was dear to her. The staff of the Central Committee apparatus knew that if a tall, beautiful woman with intelligent eyes appeared in Andropov's reception area, it meant the boss would be in a good mood that day. Irina was his human side, proof that beneath the armor of a party functionary and a KGB general, a living heart still beat. But few knew about this weakness of the almighty man. He carefully concealed his love for his daughter. In official biographies, Andropov's family was described sparingly and dryly. Irina lived her own life, far from the Kremlin offices and Lubyanka corridors. Andropov understood that in his world, love was a vulnerability, attachment a weakness that enemies could exploit. Therefore, he kept his daughter at a distance from high politics, protecting her from the filth of power games. He did not know that soon this thread connecting him to humanity would be stretched to its limit and snap with a dry, terrible crack. He did not know that the cold Moscow autumn would bring such pain that it would turn him from merely a cruel man into a monster thirsting for absolute vengeance. That autumn of 1983, Moscow did not yet know that it would soon witness one of the most terrible stories of revenge in the history of the special services. A story that would forever change the lives of 4 carefree young men and their families. Late autumn, 1983. Moscow plunged into a damp, raw evening. It had been drizzling for the 3rd day in a row, turning the leaves on the sidewalks into a slippery mush. In the air hung that special Moscow melancholy that makes people hurry home, to warmth and light. Irina Andropova was leaving the theater after a play's premiere. She was wearing an elegant coat, and around her neck was a thin gold chain with a pendant, a birthday present from her father. In her handbag lay her work pass for the Musical Life magazine, the only thing that betrayed her connection to the world of power. She caught a taxi. The driver, a gloomy, middle-aged man, drove her almost all the way home, but then, claiming his shift was over, dropped her off in an unfamiliar alley. It was only a few blocks to her home. "I'll walk, get some fresh air," Irina thought, and headed through a small park that was supposed to lead her to a familiar avenue. The park was dark and deserted. Old linden trees creaked in the wind, and the lamps barely illuminated the wet paths. It was here, in the shadow of the trees, that they were waiting for her. There were 4 of them. The first was Viktor Ostakov, 22 years old, son of the Deputy Minister of Foreign Trade. Typical, arrogant, self-confident, used to getting away with everything. He studied at MGIMO but spent more time behind the wheel of his father's Volga, driving girls around and participating in street races. A Swiss watch glistened on his wrist. He smelled of expensive cologne. In the group, he was the leader, the one who made decisions and gave orders. The second was Pavel Gromov, 23 years old, son of a general from the main political directorate of the army. A bodybuilder and boxer, a master of sports, big, strong, primitive. He respected only brute force and despised everyone weaker than him. He had repeatedly beaten up random passers-by but always escaped responsibility thanks to his father's connections. In the group, he played the role of the muscle, the one who intimidated and used force. The third was Alexei Ordenstev, 21 years old, son of a famous academician. The most dangerous of them all, an intellectual and a cynic, a student at Moscow State University's Faculty of Philosophy. He read forbidden literature, reasoned about the right of the strong and freedom from bourgeois morality. It was he who most often incited the group to dark deeds, covering up villainy with fine words about the Superman and overcoming prejudices. The fourth, Sergei Sidorov, 24 years old, the only one not from the elite, the son of a simple taxi driver. But he had attached himself to the Golden Youth as a driver and errand boy. He was ready for any depravity to earn the approval of his golden friends. More than anything, he feared losing his place in the group and returning to a world of poverty and obscurity. They were not ordinary robbers. They didn't need money. Each of their pockets was full of their father's money. They were attracted by something else, the feeling of power over the defenseless, the intoxication of their own impunity. As Irina walked past, Ostakov gave the signal to the others. They surrounded her. "A pretty girl, alone in a dark park," Ostakov said, blocking her path. His voice was calm, even polite, but dangerous lights danced in his eyes. Irina tried to get around them, but Gromov blocked her way. The boxer's huge carcass loomed over the fragile woman like a mountain. "We just want to get acquainted," Ordenstev smirked. "Talk about higher matters, about life, about death, about what true freedom is." Irina realized she was trapped. Her heart beat like a bird in a cage. She tried to scream, but Sidorov swiftly covered her mouth with his hand. "Hush! Hush!" Ostakov hissed. "No need to make noise. No one will hear you anyway. And if they do, they won't come. You know why? Because we are the masters of this city. Our daddies decide who lives and who dies." They yanked the gold chain from her neck, tore off her handbag. But that was only the beginning. Ostakov took a pair of leather gloves from his pocket and slowly put them on. "You know what I like most?" he said quietly. "Doing it with my own hands. The feeling of complete power. When you realize you can do absolutely anything, and nothing will happen to you for it." Ordenstev nodded philosophically. "Nietzsche wrote about the Superman, about one who stands above the morality of ordinary people. We are such supermen." Gromov silently clenched his fists, anticipating the developing events. Sidorov nervously looked around, not out of fear, but to make sure there were no witnesses. What happened next cannot be described in simple words. They turned the woman into a toy for their sick fantasies. Each of them participated in this monstrosity in his own way. Ostakov commanded and reveled in the power. Gromov used brute force. Ordenstev turned it all into a philosophical experiment, and Sidorov simply imitated his friends, afraid of appearing weak. When it was all over, they left Irina in the wet autumn leaves, broken, humiliated, barely alive. They got into the shiny Volga and drove away, laughing and discussing their adventure. They were absolutely certain of their impunity. For them, it was just fun. Another story to brag about to other golden offspring like themselves. They did not know who their victim was. Leafing through the documents from her handbag, Ordenstev read the name on the pass aloud. Irina Yuryevna Andropova. But the surname meant nothing to them. Too many Andropovs in Moscow. An hour later, a call came into the KGB duty station. A trembling voice reported the address of the park and a description of what had happened. Irina was found and taken to the Kremlin hospital. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the government telephone rang in the General Secretary's apartment. The duty officer of the 9th Directorate of the KGB reported the incident, trying to speak as dryly and officially as possible. Andropov listened in silence. His face did not change. Not a single muscle twitched. He just slowly put down the receiver. But at that moment, something terrible happened. The Flint man cracked, and from that crack, an abyss of cold, calculating, absolute fury looked out at the world. The four cheerful guys could not have imagined that they had just signed their own death warrant, that their laughter was heard not only by the night park, their laughter was heard by the Kremlin itself. 2 o'clock in the morning. The Kremlin slept the heavy sleep of power. In a huge apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect, the General Secretary sat in his study, going through documents. The habit of working at night was a legacy of his KGB past, when the most important decisions were made in the dark. The sharp ring of the government telephone cut through the silence. Andropov slowly picked up the receiver. Yuri Vladimirovich. The trembling voice of the duty officer from the 9th Directorate immediately betrayed the seriousness of the situation. There has been an incident with Irina Yuryevna. Time stopped. Andropov listened to the dry, official report, and with every word, something inside him broke. 4 unknown assailants. The park near the theater. The attack. The hospital. He put down the receiver and sat motionless for a long time, staring into the darkness outside the window. His face did not change. Not a single wrinkle. Not a single muscle. But if anyone could have looked into his eyes at that moment, they would have seen hell. 15 years of iron discipline, 15 years of cold calculation, 15 years of suppressing all emotions. All of it collapsed in a single second. The Flint man cracked, and from that crack, an abyss spilled out. An abyss of paternal fury. Andropov stood up and walked around the study. Every step was slow, measured, but in this slowness lurked a terrible threat, like the movement of a predator preparing to pounce. He thought about his daughter, about how she used to come to him as a little girl, climbing onto his lap, how she told him about school, about friends, about first crushes, how he taught her to be strong, independent, not to rely on anyone's patronage, and now these animals had dared to touch the only bright thing he had. Andropov stopped in front of the portrait of Dzerzhinsky hanging on the wall. Iron Felix looked at him from the photograph with steel eyes. "We must be merciless to the enemies of the revolution," the founder of the Cheka once said. "I will also be merciless to the enemies of my daughter," Andropov said quietly. He sat down at the desk again and began to think, not emotionally. He knew how to suppress emotions. He thought like a professional, like a man who had run the most powerful special service in the world for 15 years. He could act officially. Raise the entire Moscow police force, find the scoundrels, try them, imprison them. But that meant publicity. Irina's name would end up in protocols, would become the property of investigators, prosecutors, judges, and therefore, gossips. His daughter would become an object of speculation, a topic for dirty talk. No, he could not allow that. This meant he had to act unofficially, quietly, without witnesses or documents, so that no one would ever know the truth. So that the 4 scoundrels would simply disappear, one by one, each by their own death. Andropov picked up another telephone, the direct line to Lubyanka. "Connect me with Drozdov," he ordered. Major General Yuri Ivanovich Drozdov, head of Directorate S, the most secret subdivision of the first Chief Directorate of the KGB. Officially, they were engaged in illegal intelligence. Unofficially, the most delicate and dirty work, the kind that wasn't written about in reports. Drozdov was a legend, the man who had created the network of Soviet illegals all over the world. His agents worked in Western governments, in NATO headquarters, in scientific centers. But Directorate S had another function, one that only a select few knew about. They were the cleaners, a death squadron. They carried out the most delicate assignments for the leadership, when it was necessary to eliminate a particularly dangerous traitor or an inconvenient witness. When ordinary methods were not suitable, they called Drozdov. The phone in his apartment rang at 3 o'clock in the morning. Drozdov was a light sleeper, a professional habit. He recognized Andropov's voice immediately. Yuri Ivanovich, there is work, the general secretary said dryly. 4 targets. Moscow. The task is not just liquidation. The task is exemplary retribution. A pause. Drozdov understood everything. Exemplary retribution was a special formulation. It meant the matter was personal, very personal, and that ordinary methods would not suffice here. Complete autonomy of action, Andropov continued. Resources are unlimited. Report, directly to me, orally. Deadline. The sooner, the better. My assistant will bring the details. Drozdov understood everything without needing more words. In 20 years of service, he had learned to read between the lines. They didn't just need killers. They needed artists, directors of terror. Understood, Yuri Vladimirovich. It will be done. An hour later, 3 people gathered in Drozdov's office. Almost no one in the KGB knew their faces. Even within their own department, they were simply called Group Mirror. The group was led by Colonel Igor Sirov, codename Artist. His nickname was not accidental. He turned every one of his operations into a performance, a terrible, frightening performance that carried a specific message. Sirov believed that punishment should be not only inevitable, but also symbolic. Every enemy should receive exactly what they fear most. This was the only way to achieve the maximum impact, not only on the victim, but on everyone else who might think of committing similar crimes. The general secretary's assistant brought a thin folder. Inside were 4 photographs, operational surveillance snapshots taken just hours ago, and 4 dossiers. Drozdov handed the folder to the artist. Igor. His voice was quiet but heavy. This is order number 1. The scenario must be such that all this golden youth forgets for the next 10 years that they are the masters of life. The artist nodded. His usually sleepy eyes lit up with a cold, creative fire. He was already painting his performance in his mind. Each must receive what he deserves, Drozdov continued. Not just a bullet in the back of the head, but the very thing he fears most in the world, so that before they die, they understand why they are dying, and who sent them the bill. The artist studied the dossiers. 4 targets, 4 different personalities, 4 different fears. He will be first, he decided. Ostakov. He's the biggest coward. He'll break quickly and tell us all the details. His confession will be the prologue to our performance. Group Mirror got to work. The best specialists in surveillance and technical services were thrown into supporting the operation. Within a matter of hours, the apartments and cars of all 4 were under control. Eavesdropping, tailing, studying their daily routines. The machine of state terror, which had slumbered during the Brezhnev years of stagnation, began to gain momentum. Slowly, inevitably, mercilessly. The first act was ready to be staged. The performance was beginning. The next morning greeted Viktor Ostakov, as usual. A luxurious apartment on Kutuzovsky Prospect. A coming-of-age present from his father. Imported furniture, an expensive carpet, a bar with foreign whiskey. The golden boy's life flowed along, familiar and carefree. Ostakov woke up around noon with a slight hangover. Yesterday's adventure seemed distant, almost unreal. Just a bit of fun that would soon be forgotten. He'd had plenty of fun like that. His father always got him out of any trouble. He reached for the phone to call his buddies and discuss plans for the evening. But the phone was silent. Dead silence on the line. Ostakov frowned. Strange. The connection in the elite building always worked flawlessly. He tried to turn on the television. The screen remained black. The radio receiver also showed no signs of life. Even the electric clock on the wall had stopped. A problem on the line, Victor thought, and headed for the front door to go outside and find out what was happening. The door wouldn't open. The lock turned, but the door seemed to be bolted from the outside with some powerful latch. Ostakov jerked the handle, pushed with his shoulder, kicked it. Useless. The steel door had become an insurmountable barrier. Panic began to creep up with cold fingers. Ostakov rushed to the window. Kutuzovsky Prospect, usually bustling, was empty. Like in a movie about the end of the world. No cars, no pedestrians, no sounds. Dead silence. He tried to open the window. Locked. Break the glass? The 15th floor. Asphalt below. Suicide. The apartment had turned into a perfect prison. At that moment, the phone rang. Ostakov lunged for the receiver. "Hello?" His voice was trembling. "We know what you did in the park yesterday, Victor," said a cold, mechanical voice. A voice without emotion, without intonation, like a robot's. His blood ran cold. "Who is this? What do you want?" "We know everything, and we are coming for you." A dial tone. Ostakov looked out the window and saw them. On the opposite side of the prospect stood 3 motionless figures in identical gray cloaks. They didn't move. They just stared at his windows. Their faces were indistinguishable, but he could feel their gazes on his skin. The lights in the apartment went out. Complete ringing darkness fell, and in that darkness, the most terrifying sound of Ostakov's life rang out. The slow creak of a key turning in the lock of his front door. The door that he himself had locked from the inside. With all the locks. The door opened silently. A man in a gray cloak stood on the threshold. His face was not visible, only a dark shadow under the hood. "Who are you?" Ostakov rasped, cowering in the corner. "We are the ones who carry out the sentences," the stranger replied in the same mechanical voice. "We need the truth. The whole truth about what you did yesterday." He was holding a small briefcase. He opened it, and Ostakov saw not weapons, but surgical instruments, scalpels, clamps, needles, and several syringes with clear liquid. "This is truth serum," the stranger explained. "After the injection, you will tell us not only what happened yesterday, you will tell us all your secrets, all your dirty secrets." "My father," Ostakov stammered. "Your father is currently in an urgent meeting at the Council of Ministers. He won't be back for at least 6 hours. In that time, anything at all could happen to you." The stranger advanced slowly, holding the syringe ready. "Don't!" Ostakov screamed. "I'll tell you everything! Everything!" And he began to talk. The words poured out of him like pus from a lanced boil. He told them about the previous evening in minute detail, how they had tracked Irina, how they planned the attack, who did what, naming names, addresses, meeting spots. He gave everyone up, betraying his friends with the same relish with which he had humiliated a defenseless woman the day before. The stranger silently recorded everything on a miniature tape recorder. When the confession was over, he stood up. "Thank you. You've been very helpful. And now, the punishment." He took out another syringe, this one with a cloudy, yellowish liquid. "What is that?" Ostakov whispered. "A special compound. It causes the breakdown of neural pathways in the brain. You will slowly descend into madness, into the world of your worst nightmares, and it will last for a long, long time." For what? For her tears, for her pain, for her humiliation. This is a personal order. From her father. A belated understanding flickered in Ostakov's eyes. He finally understood whose daughter they had touched. And with that realization, a terror far greater than the fear of death washed over him. The injection. Ostakov went limp. His eyes glazed over. He began to swat at invisible enemies. His consciousness plunged into a personal hell created just for him. The stranger put away his instruments and disappeared as silently as he had appeared. 3 days later, neighbors, alarmed by strange screams from the apartment, called the police. Ostakov was found dead with signs of severe synthetic drug poisoning. The official conclusion? Overdose and cardiac arrest. The first act had been played. The artist had his confession and had sent the first enemy his bill. Now it was the other's turn. Pavel Gromov had believed in one simple truth his entire life. Strength decides everything. Big, muscular, with hands like hammers. He was a master of sports and boxing and was proud of it. In his world, there were only the strong and the weak, predators and prey. And he was always the predator. The son of a general from the main political directorate of the army, he had known since childhood that he could get away with anything. Beat up a classmate? Dad would take care of it. Maimed a random passerby? The case would be hushed up. Broke a coach's jaw at the sports club? The witnesses would forget what they saw. Gromov reveled in his strength. Every punch was a drug to him. He loved to see the fear in his victim's eyes, to hear the crack of breaking bones, to feel how a person turned into a helpless doll under his blows. On the evening after Ostakov's death, Gromov was returning from training in an excellent mood. The news of his friend's overdose didn't upset him. He had always been a weakling. Sooner or later, something like that was bound to happen. Other things awaited him. His coach had promised to set him up for a serious fight with a promising opponent. Gromov looked forward to methodically destroying a new victim in the ring to the approving shouts of the crowd. It was dark in the entryway of his apartment building. The light bulbs were out for some reason. Gromov paid it no mind. He was used to relying on his fists in any situation. Even when three figures emerged from the darkness, he wasn't scared. "Guys, you've come to the wrong place," he sneered, clenching his fists. "I'm not the man you want to mess with." They were silent. They moved quickly, cohesively, professionally. These were not street thugs or random robbers. These were specialists. Gromov tried to land his signature punch, a straight left to the jaw, but his opponent easily dodged and countered with a short, precise blow to the solar plexus. The boxer doubled over, gasping for air. The next blow landed on his knee, the crunch of ligaments. Gromov collapsed, another blow to the elbow, another crunch. They didn't hit him in the face or the body. Their blows were short, precise, and terrible in their purposefulness. They methodically, with anatomical knowledge, broke his arms and legs. The very hands he was proud of, the very fists that were his weapons and his pride, were being turned into helpless fragments of bone and cartilage. Gromov screamed. For the first time in his life, he wasn't screaming from rage, but from terror and pain. For the first time, he understood what it was like to be weak, helpless, dependent on someone else's mercy. "Like it?" one of the attackers asked quietly, unbending his broken fingers. "You love to break people? Now you're the one being broken." They dragged him into the elevator and went up to the roof of the 15-story building. The lights of Moscow at night were scattered below. Beautiful and distant. At the edge of the roof, the man in the gray cloak was waiting for him. The artist, the one who had designed this terrible production. "You loved strength, didn't you, kid?" he asked, approaching Gromov, who was trembling from pain and terror. "Thought you were the strongest. You were wrong." Who are you?" the boxer rasped. "We are the strength of the state, and you dared to raise your hand against the daughter of this state, against the daughter of the man who can wipe entire countries off the face of the earth." They dragged Gromov to the very edge. Below, 15 floors down, the asphalt glistened, wet from the rain, cruel, relentless. "You won't die right away," the artist said, taking out a syringe. "This drug blocks the pain receptors from the fractures, but it sharpens all your other senses. You won't feel the pain from your broken bones." The injection. Gromov felt a strange relief. The sharp pain from the fractures began to subside. "But you will be fully conscious as you fall. You will see every fraction of a second of your descent, every meter of the approaching asphalt. And they will be the longest seconds of your worthless life." The artist nodded to his assistants. "Send your regards to the General Secretary's daughter. Tell her her father didn't forget." A push. Gromov flew into the abyss. 15 stories is a long way. Long enough to realize what is happening. Long enough to regret what he had done. Long enough to understand the price of cruelty. He fell, and he thought of that woman in the park, of her eyes full of terror, of her screams for help. Now he was screaming too. But no one heard him. The asphalt approached with terrifying inevitability. The next day, the newspapers wrote about a tragic accident. A famous athlete, a general's son in a fit of depression, had committed suicide by falling from the roof of his own house. No one bothered to find out why the suicide victim's arms and legs had been professionally broken even before the fall. Too many questions, too dangerous for one's health. The second act was complete. He who worshipped brute force learned that a greater force exists. The power of a father's love, multiplied by the might of the state machine. Alexei Erdintsev considered himself a genius, a student at the philosophy faculty of Moscow State University, the son of a famous academician. From childhood, he was used to being the smartest in any company. His sharp mind easily operated with complex concepts. He read Nietzsche in the original and quoted Dostoevsky by heart. It was Erdintsev who was the ideologist of that foursome. It was he who turned the animal instincts of his friends into a philosophical concept. It was he who deliberated on the right of the strong and the overcoming of bourgeois morality. In his words, the dirtiest deeds sounded like the bold experiments of a Superman. After Astakov's death and Gromov's suicide, Ordenstev was not frightened. On the contrary, he saw confirmation of his theories in what was happening. The weak are eliminated, only the worthy remain, he mused, sipping coffee in the university cafe. He did not know that he was already being watched, that his every word was being recorded, his every step tracked, that the artist was preparing a special scenario for him, the most sophisticated and cruel one. The operation began in the morning at the university. Ardentsev, as always, came to the lecture on the history of philosophy, ready to show off his erudition. But something was wrong. His classmates avoided his gaze. When he appeared, conversations fell silent. People looked away. They looked at him with a strange mixture of pity and fear, as at a seriously ill person. "Alyosha, how are you?" his friend Irina asked sympathetically. "Maybe you should see a doctor after that incident." "What incident?" Ardentsev didn't understand. "Well, yesterday you were shouting all over the library that you were being persecuted. They called security." Ordenstev remembered no such thing. Yesterday he had been calmly preparing for the seminar at home. He hadn't gone anywhere. The professor also looked at him strangely, called on him to answer. But when Alexei began to brilliantly expound Schopenhauer's concepts, the teacher interrupted him. "Ordenstev, you are speaking incoherently. Maybe you should see a psychologist. We have good specialists at the university." Incoherently. He was explaining the most complex philosophical concepts with such clarity that even the C students should have understood. After classes, his best friend Igor clapped him on the shoulder. "Listen, Lyoka. I know a good doctor, specializes in, well, nervous disorders. You should get a consultation. Otherwise, these bouts of aggression, it's serious." "What bouts?" Alexei asked, bewildered. Igor looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean, what bouts? Yesterday you attacked Maxim in the cafeteria, nearly choked him. Said he was a KGB agent and was following you." That hadn't happened either. He hadn't even come to the university yesterday. Worried parents and a doctor from the district polyclinic were waiting at home. His father, the academician, looked depressed. "Son, the university called us, told us about your strange behavior. The doctor wants to talk to you." The doctor, a young man in glasses, asked questions softly but persistently, about voices in his head, about paranoid ideas, about hallucinations. Ordenstev denied everything, but the doctor nodded understandingly, writing something on a card. "A classic case of paranoid schizophrenia with onset in young adulthood," he concluded. "Urgent hospitalization is needed, before it's too late." "I'm healthy!" Alexei shouted. "This is all untrue. They want to get rid of me." The doctor nodded again. "You see, classic paranoia. The patient believes there is a conspiracy against him." An hour later, an ambulance arrived. Alexei was taken to the famous Kashchenko Hospital, a symbol of Soviet punitive psychiatry. White walls, bars on the windows, the smell of bleach and human sorrow. A ward for 6 people, where true madmen lay. Someone mumbled prayers, someone waved their arms, chasing away invisible enemies. "Doctor, I'm healthy. This is a mistake," Ordenstev shouted to the doctor on duty. "That's what they all say," he replied indifferently. "We are starting treatment. Aminazine, haloperidol, the standard regimen. Powerful neuroleptics turned a person into a spineless vegetable, destroyed the connections between neurons, extinguished the personality like blowing out a candle." Alexei tried to resist, but they tied him to the bed and injected the drugs by force. His brilliant mind began to disintegrate. Thoughts became confused, reality mixed with delirium. The philosophical concepts he was so proud of crumbled like a house of cards. He tried to explain to the nurses that he wasn't crazy, that this was revenge for some crime he hadn't committed, but the drugs were already doing their work. His speech became slurred, logic slipped away. After a week of continuous treatment, nothing remained of the former Alexei Ordenstev. He lay drooling, staring senselessly at the ceiling. The great mind had turned into a pile of rubble. At night, a man in a white coat entered his ward. It was the artist. "Well, philosopher," he said quietly, bending over the cot, How do you like your superhumanity? You deliberated on the right of the strong. Well, we showed you who is strong here. He took out a syringe with a lethal dose of insulin. Regards from the General Secretary's daughter, and this is for every tear she shed. An injection, an insulin coma, a death that could easily be blamed on a medical error while treating a violent patient. In the morning, an entry appeared in the medical records. Acute heart failure during treatment for a severe form of schizophrenia. The one who considered himself a Superman died like an insect, crushed by the system he himself had underestimated. Sergei Sidorov was the most pathetic of the foursome. The only one not from the elite, the son of a simple taxi driver. His whole life he dreamed of the good life, of the luxury he saw every day while sitting behind the wheel of his master's Volga. 24 years of serving the golden youth. 24 years of humiliation that he swallowed with a smile, hoping to one day become one of them in that glittering world. He drove the rich kids to restaurants and casinos, waited outside their mistresses' entrances, washed cars, and bought drugs, always ready for any villainy for the sake of his friends' approval. After the deaths of his 3 comrades, Sidorov experienced real terror for the first time in his life. Astakov was found dead from an overdose. Gromov committed suicide. Ardintsev died in the mental hospital. Too many coincidences, too quickly and too strangely, were all the participants of that fatal night dying. But who could be hunting them? They didn't even know who their victim was, just some random woman in the park. Sidorov paced his shabby 2-room apartment in Biryolevo, unable to find peace. Maybe leave, disappear in another city. But with what? He was flat broke. He had no job other than being a driver for the rich kids. In the evening, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood an elegantly dressed man with a leather briefcase. An expensive suit, quality shoes, a gold watch. Everything Sidorov had dreamed of. "Citizen Sidorov?" the guest said with a smile. "Congratulations. Your Sport Lotto ticket has won the grand prize. A Volga 24 car and 10,000 rubles. Time stopped. Sidorov couldn't believe his ears. Nearby, his mother, a cleaner, bustled about, clasping her hands in joy and weeping with happiness. Is it true?" he whispered. "Of course. Here are the keys to your car. It's parked right under the windows. And here are your winnings." The man handed over a thick wad of crisp 100-ruble notes. The money smelled of printing ink and fulfilled dreams. "You just need to sign a few papers for our records," the guest added. Walking into the room, he saw a brand-new beige Volga really was standing outside the window, shining in the lamplight, just like the one his former masters had. No, even better. Completely new, without scratches or dents. Sidorov signed the documents with trembling hands, without reading. Plans were already forming in his head. Here he is, pulling up in this beauty to his old acquaintances. Here they are, looking at him with respect, not as a servant, but as an equal, at last. His mother bustled in the kitchen, putting the best food they had in the house on the table. She wanted to celebrate her son's good fortune. It's not every day ordinary people win that kind of money. "Tell me, Sergei," the man asked, as if in passing, once the last signature was in place. "Where were you the night before last? Do you have an alibi?" Sidorov tensed. The smile slowly slid off his face. "What? Why are you asking? Just, by chance, you weren't in the park near the Soviet Army theater?" His blood ran cold. Sidorov turned pale as a sheet. He understood, but it was already too late. "You know everything." The guest's voice turned from friendly to icy. "You were there. You were holding the wheel. You waited while your masters had fun and listened to the woman scream." The man slowly stood up, pulling out a pistol with a silencer. "The lottery is over. Your prize is death. And we'll give the money to your mother for your funeral. Oh, the money and the car. The money is real, but it's for your funeral. Though no," he smirked wryly, "your mother will also get her prize for raising such a bastard." 2 quiet, almost silent pops sounded in the apartment. One for Sidorov, in the heart. The second for his mother, who ran out of the kitchen with a plate in her hands at the strange sound. She was an unnecessary witness. The next day, the police discovered 2 corpses. The theory was simple and logical. The son, a criminal, had received a large sum of money from shady sources, refused to share with his mother, killed her in a quarrel, and then, in a fit of remorse, killed himself. The neighbors testified that they had heard screaming and swearing. They had also seen Sergei bragging about the money and the new car. It all added up. The Volga disappeared that same night. The money remained as a cynical reminder of the price of betrayal. Sidorov got exactly what he had dreamed of his whole life: a beautiful death. He died a rich man with a wad of money in his pocket. True, he didn't get to enjoy his wealth. Operation Vengeance was complete. 4 criminals had each received what they deserved. The artist reported to Drozdov, who reported to Andropov. The general secretary listened to the report silently, his expression unchanged. He just nodded. Good work. Forget it. But forgetting wasn't possible. The story was just beginning. Academician Viktor Ordenstev sat in his late son's study and couldn't stop the tears. Alexei had been a scoundrel, a cynic, but still his son, his only son, and now he was gone. The official version: death from complications while treating acute schizophrenia. Medical error. But the academician didn't believe it. Events had developed too quickly. Too suddenly, his healthy, intelligent son had turned into a violent madman. Sorting through Alexei's things, his father stumbled upon a thin notebook with a gray cover, a diary. He opened it and began to read. With every page, the academician's face grew paler. Alexei described his exploits with sadistic glee. How they had stalked the victim near the theater. How they planned the attack. Who did what. He had even drawn a diagram of the park and marked the crime scene with a small cross, like a pirate's treasure map. But the most terrible part was at the end of the entry. Alexei described how Astakov had read the documents from the victim's handbag and said her name: Irina Yuryevna Andropova. The academician froze. His whole world collapsed around him. Andropova. The daughter of the general secretary, the daughter of the all-powerful man who could wipe entire states off the face of the earth, and his son, his damned son, had dared to touch her. Now everything was clear. The sudden deaths of all 4 participants. Astakov, an overdose. Gromov, suicide. Alexei, medical error. Sidorov, a family drama. Too many coincidences. This was revenge, cold, calculated, absolute paternal revenge, for his violated daughter. The academician sat over the diary and wept. He wept from grief, from shame, from terror. His son was not just a cynic. He was a monster, and he had paid for it with his life. But the academician could not accept it. Yes, his son was a villain, deserved punishment. But not this. Not this slow, sophisticated humiliation that turned a brilliant mind into a pile of rubble. Revenge begat the thirst for revenge. Ordenstev Sr. had connections in dissident circles. He secretly met with academician Sakharov, passing information to the West about human rights violations in the USSR. Now he had a weapon against Andropov himself. The academician made several photocopies of the most compromising pages of the diary. He hid the original in a safe place and sent the copies through trusted channels to a correspondent for Radio Liberty in Stockholm. "Publish this when the time is right," he wrote in the cover letter, "when it will inflict maximum damage on the regime and the memory of this executioner." He did not know that his apartment had long been bugged, that his every step was monitored, that the KGB quickly learned of the leak. The news reached Andropov. The general secretary was furious. Not because of the threat to his political image. He feared something else. That the truth about Irina, about what they had done to her, would become known to the whole world. That was more terrifying to him than any scandal. "The academician did not betray me," he said quietly to Drozdov. "He betrayed my daughter. He made her suffering public. There is no forgiveness for that." But it was impossible to kill a world-famous scientist. Too much attention, too many questions. They had to act more subtly. The artist received a new assignment, the most difficult of his career. The operation began late at night. The academician was returning from his dacha on a deserted highway. His Volga was overtaken by a strange, unmarked minibus, which forced him to stop. People in silvery, glowing overalls emerged from the bus. Their faces were hidden by helmets with dark visors. One pointed a strange device at the academician, resembling a flashlight. A bright flash, and Ordenstev lost consciousness. He awoke in a round white room with no windows or doors, tied to a chair. The same beings in silver robes bent over him. They silently conducted some experiments, took samples, shone colored lights into his eyes. 3 days of nightmare, 3 days of silent, methodical terror. The academician was convinced he had fallen into the hands of aliens. KGB specialists had created the perfect illusion of extraterrestrial contact. When he was returned to his car on the same highway, Ordenstev was broken. He told everyone about the alien abduction, but no one believed him. Colleagues, his wife, friends, everyone decided the old man had gone mad with grief. As a source of information for the West, he ceased to exist. He turned into a town lunatic whom no one took seriously. But the copies of the diary already lay in a safe in Stockholm, like a time bomb. Winter, 1984. Andropov was dying in the Kremlin hospital. Severe kidney disease was slowly killing him. But even on his deathbed, he thought about the threat that hung over his daughter's memory. One of his last orders was, "Find the copies of the diary. Retrieve them at any cost." This information must never be published. On February 9th, Andropov died, but his last will became law for Directorate S. The long hunt for the ghost of the past began. Andropov's death in February 1984 did not stop the machine of revenge. His last will became a sacred order for Directorate S. The copies of the diary had to disappear forever, wherever they were hidden. The new leaders, first the ailing Chernenko and then the energetic Gorbachev, were busy with perestroika and glasnost. The country was changing before their very eyes. But for General Drozdov, the deceased chief's order remained sacred. The most complex operation in the history of Soviet intelligence began. Not against an enemy state, but against a scrap of paper, against a ghost from the past that could explode at any moment. First, they tracked down the Radio Liberty journalist in Stockholm who had received the copies from the academician. Ivan Koltsov, a correspondent with 20 years of experience, sensed the danger immediately. Surveillance on him began. His phone was tapped, his mail was checked, but Koltsov was a professional. He realized the material was too hot to keep. So he passed the copies to the station's central archive in Munich and went to ground himself. They had to start over. Cultivating radio station employees, attempts to infiltrate the archives, psychological pressure on key figures. The work dragged on for years. In 1987, they managed to recruit Heinz Müller, the deputy head of the radio station's security service. He was caught by a classic weakness: gambling debts. He lost heavily at the Monte Carlo casino, getting into debt with people who don't like to wait. The KGB offered a simple choice. Either his creditors get his kidneys and liver, or he gets $1 million for one small favor. Müller chose life and money. The operation to retrieve the documents was carried out with surgical precision. On a December night in 1988, Müller deactivated the alarm in the archive room. Soviet specialists infiltrated, found the necessary folders, and replaced them with fakes containing harmless materials about agriculture. The real films with the diary photocopies vanished without a trace. An hour later, they were already being transported to the Soviet embassy in Bern. Drozdov reported to the new KGB leadership. Comrade Andropov's order has been fulfilled. The threat is neutralized. Moscow breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed all loose ends were tied up. The original diary had been seized from the academician back in 1984 and destroyed. The copies from the West had returned and burned in the furnaces of the Lubyanka crematorium. But they missed one detail: the human factor. The journalist Koltsov turned out to be not just cautious, but suspicious. He trusted no one. Not the KGB, not the CIA, not even his own bosses. Therefore, when handing the material over to the station's archive, he made one more copy for himself. This last copy lay in a safe deposit box in a tiny Swiss bank, Zürcher Credit. Koltsov left the key to the box with his lawyer, with instructions: to be opened after my death, or if something happens to me. And 6 months after the successful operation in Munich, Ivan Koltsov died in a car crash on a mountain road in Austria. The car went off a cliff on a sharp turn. The brakes failed. A very convenient death, which surprised no one. Everyone was sure that now, finally, all traces were destroyed. The secret was buried forever under the wreckage of the collapsing USSR. It turned into a legend, a grim tall tale that Lubyanka veterans told in whispers to young employees over a mug of beer. About how, in harsh times, real Chekists knew how to defend the honor of their own. No one knew that in the steel safe of Zerker, credit lay a small key, tarnished by time. The key to Pandora's box. Years passed, the USSR collapsed, Drozdov and his team passed into the next world. Generations of intelligence officers changed. Only the archives remembered the Andropov case, and old conspiracy theorists spinning their webs. But the ghost of 1983 waited patiently for its hour. It waited in the Swiss safe, among bank documents and wills, like a time bomb with a 40-year timer. The story was not over. The most terrible part was yet to come. Zurich, 2023. The old lawyer, Werner Steiner, died quietly in his sleep in his apartment overlooking the lake. His heirs, sorting through the deceased's affairs, stumbled upon a strange, sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only after death." Inside lay a time-tarnished key and a 40-year-old letter. The Radio Liberty journalist asked that, in the event of his death, the contents of the safe deposit box be made public, documents about the crimes of the Soviet regime against its own citizens. The Swiss burghers, raised in the tradition of lawfulness, carried out the deceased's will. In the box, they discovered a microfilm with photocopies of handwritten pages in Russian. The general meaning was clear even without translation. It was a sensation of historical proportions. Not knowing what to do with such a find, the heirs put the documents up for a private auction. The condition was unusual. The winner would be the one who offered not only money, but also a coherent plan for using the material. A secret war for the ghost of the past began. The first to enter the game was a Russian oligarch in London, a fierce critic of the current government. He saw the documents as the perfect weapon against the heirs of the totalitarian regime. Publication was intended to show the Western world the true face of the Russian special services. The second side was represented by an inconspicuous diplomat from the Russian embassy in Bern. For the Foreign Intelligence Service, these documents were not compromising material, but a historical relic, evidence that even in the darkest times, there were people ready to defend honor and justice. But unexpectedly, a third figure appeared. Anna Ordensteva, a French human rights activist and granddaughter of that very same academician. Learning of the auction, she realized this was her chance to tell the truth about her family. Not as a political pamphlet, but as a human drama about how the system mutilates souls. At that moment, someone no one expected entered the game. Retired Colonel Igor Sirov, the former artist, was living out his days in a dacha near Moscow. He was over 90, but his former colleagues turned to him for advice. The old Chekist made a paradoxical decision to help the human rights activist. He despised both the greedy oligarch and the modern effective managers in his former agency. Only Anna, strangely enough, could tell this story correctly, as a warning, not as propaganda. Through intermediaries, he anonymously passed additional materials to the young woman, without classifications or names, but with stunning details that would turn the dry documents into a gripping story about the price of revenge and justice. After receiving these materials, Anna convinced the Swiss to give her the documents for free. Work began on the book, Bloody Autumn of 1983. News of the upcoming publication caused panic. Both in London and Moscow, they realized the situation was out of control. But the old artist protected his final ward, sending clear warnings to her detractors. The book came out and had the effect of an exploding bomb. The reaction was polarized. In the West, they saw confirmation of the regime's bloodiness. In Russia, however, many perceived the story as a symbol of just retribution, of a system protecting its own. But the main outcome was not a political scandal, but deep reflections on the boundaries between law and justice, between state protection and state terror. An independent director made a film based on the book, Autumn. Dark, harsh, forcing one not to rejoice or resent, but to think about the price of power, the price of revenge, and that even the noblest goals do not justify monstrous means. The story that began 40 years ago in a Moscow park ended not with the victory of good or evil, but with a question. Where is the line between justice and barbarism? And is humanity ready to answer this question? This material is a work of historical fiction in the genre of historical investigation, with elements of alternative history. All described events, dialogues, and situations are an artistic interpretation of historical facts and do not claim documentary accuracy. Any resemblance to real events is purely speculative. The author does not call for violence.